Dr. Meredith May. I'm a history professor over at Kilgore College and at TCU. And this is?
I am Jasmine Stoker. I'm a therapist in town. I work in a lot of different places, but I'm the treasurer for 1919 project.
Yes.
All right.
So yeah, we are both part of the 1919 Longview Remembrance Project. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about our marker, which was part of the project, and then Jasmine is going to talk about the documentary that we are working on. So before we dive into any of that, I'm going to start the same way I start with my students. How many of y'all are already familiar with what happened here in Longview in 1919? Way more hands than I usually see from my students. So just a little bit of background information for those of you who did not raise your hand. During the summer of 1919, which is frequently called Red Summer, there were over 25 race riots across the United States. It was largely inspired because, does anybody know what major event happened from 1914 to 1918? Good, World War I. So, when World War I came to an end, veterans start coming home. And there was a lot of fear that African American veterans were going to do really scary, ridiculous things like ask for equality. And that they might not know their place anymore. So this tension was underlying everything as 1919 arrives and those veterans are coming home. On top of that, here in Longview there was some tension because there was a Black Businessmen's League. That was a national thing. It had been started by Booker T. Washington. And some members of that league were encouraging local African American farmers, cotton farmers, to sell their cotton directly to Galveston instead of going through the local middlemen here in Longview who were probably taking advantage of them. So you've got 2 points of tension that existed. Then in June of 1919, an African American man from Longview named Lemuel Walters was caught in a consensual relationship with a white woman from Kilgore. He was arrested, taken from the sheriff's office, and lynched. We think, as was reported by members of the white woman's family, as well as other locals. About a month later, what happened, that lynching was reported on by the Chicago Defender, an African-American newspaper. Local whites believed that the person who had written the article about the lynching of Lemuel Walters was a local teacher named Samuel Jones. They thought that because he was a distributor for the newspaper. And so 2 brothers of the white woman from Kilgore attacked Samuel Jones just right over there on the corner of the courthouse, right in front of it. He was beaten, told he needed to leave town. That night, a mob shows up to Jones' house, a white mob, to make sure he was going to leave town. What they didn't know was that Samuel Jones, along with other leaders of the African American community, like a physician named Calvin Davis, and a lot of them, they're veterans. They took up defensive positions. They were ready for that mob. And when this mob, about 12 to 15 people, show up, they opened fire. It was buckshot. About 3 white men were injured with the buckshot. 1 white man took refuge under the house. He was dragged out and beaten. Those guys, though, the white men, turned tail, went back downtown, did fire alarm, called up a bigger mob. They then went back to Jones's house, Davis's house, some other black residences, some businesses, burned them down. By that point in time, the mayor knows what's going on, and so he contacts governor. The governor at the time was Hobby. Hobby calls out the Rangers, but they're not going to be able to get there until probably Sunday at the earliest. This was all happening on Friday. So troops are sent as well. Now, that night, things kind of died down. But the father-in-law of one of the people who was involved, the doctor, he was approached by the sheriff. The sheriff has different stories about why he came after. The man's name was Marion Bush. But Marion Bush fled, and he was shot in the back by a farmer while fleeing the arrest. He is the only casualty of the riot in terms of a death. At that point, though, that's whenever the governor declares martial law. So everybody's guns in all of Longview and all of Kilgore are taken. In fact, that's the only photos we have of the riot are of the guns, the stacks of guns at the courthouse. These are the only photos we have from the riot. Again, tensions kind of faded. People were arrested, both African Americans and whites. The African Americans were taken to Austin for their own protection. Nobody was tried. Everybody was turned loose. The African Americans were told not to come back to Longview. We have found that that wasn't necessarily the case. At least one of them definitely did come back. That's it. Longview tried to kind of basically move on and forget. Which brings us to the marker in our project. So when I moved to Longview in 2017, I'm originally from Huntington down near Lufkin. So I'm not a complete transplant. I am from East Texas. I was teaching about this and discovered, of course, not a lot of people knew about it. There was no historical marker. I was like, well, we need a historical marker. That needs to happen. I was very active on the marker committee. Mr. McElroy had talked about the Gregg County Historical Commission, so we were both on that. So knew about the marker application process, wanted to get the ball rolling. And then a man named Clint Holmes came to a Rotary Club meeting I was at to talk about 1919. And I was like, me too! So I accosted him in the parking lot afterwards and was like, I've been wanting to do a marker project. You say you want to do a documentary. Feel like this is meant to be. He, after fending me off a little bit, I was very excited. We put together a team of really wonderful people dedicated to telling this story. We got the marker application submitted. We got it approved by the state. It is currently being cast. And then it's going to come to us, and on Monday, the County Commissioner's Court is actually voting on whether or not it's going to go on the county courthouse grounds, which is where we want to put it. So hopefully that is where it's going to be. I'm now going to turn it over to Jasmine to talk about our documentary project.
Yes, Clint Holmes is a big part of this documentary. He is the person that has gathered all of our team together to come together to talk about what we want to do, to really put some action behind what we say that we want to do. Clint's not here today, so I get to stand in his stead. This documentary project started, I would say, even before the conversation with Clint and Meredith. I would say that this has been something that's in people's hearts for quite a while. That even before that, I remember being a part of the Unity and Diversity Committee and this being a conversation that was happening in that room. During that time, there was some tension with doing this with the city that put it on its brakes. And then shortly after that, Clint Holmes came into it. Vance Freeman, who is a big donor into what it is that we're doing, came into it. They built out this committee, which involves me, Meredith, Alicia Johnson, Curita Dunkoff. That's not, I put an I in there every time and it's not in there. Dolores Airline, and we just put in a producer who is Chris Lamarck, who comes from Houston. He's done some really big documentaries with faith and racial relations, and so it's been really cool to work together. The documentary is, our purpose for it is to bring the truth to light. I mean, we heard from Mr. McElroy, we heard from Mr. Snoddy earlier today about the importance of being able to put history in front of people. I think as a therapist that when the implications of mental health, when you don't tell the truth about history, are huge. That's why you get into repetition, and that becomes because you aren't able to face your shame. You aren't able to face your guilt, or you're not able to even know your history to know where you come from to know the strength of that. And I see the implications of that in our school systems, and how in our city systems, and how we put markers up and we don't know what they mean. How we don't take markers down and we do know what they mean. And so when we are able to have a documentary that is in front of people that brings the truth to light, that brings us into our 3 values, which is to lament, to repent, and to reconcile. So often we want to jump to reconciliation. That's not where we start.
That's right.
We need to start with knowing your history so that you can lament what happened. And even hearing the story about Mr. Snoddy and learning your history, that I am moved, I'm moved especially by the part where you were talking about your grandmother, and she used to say that somebody found me.
Yeah.
Because so much of this history is lost and needs to be found. And not just for the sake of those families, but for the sake of African American dignity in this area. And so to be able to lament what happened, honestly, truly, not like, I mean, I can be a feisty person, I'm gonna be honest with you. Especially in the last years that I've experienced a lot of microaggressions and racial trauma myself. But we're not coming into this like we want to burn Longview down. That's not the energy that we're coming from. We're really coming from a place where we want to listen and tell the truth about what happened.
All right.
And telling the truth, being able to sit with people and lament truly about the lives that were lost, the businesses that were burned down, how that impacted the Black community here, how we still see that impact today. And then to repent. That means that after we lament, that we turn from what we did and we make correction.
Yes.
We make correction in relationship. We make correction in building funds for Black businesses in this area. We make correction for this historical marker. My hope is that we can make corrections with some other monuments that's not supposed to be there. And then that after all of those things is where we can reconcile, right? That we don't come together without acknowledging pain. We don't come together without acknowledging legacy. We don't come together without acknowledging truth and saying the truth. Confession, telling the same thing about the same thing. And so our documentary is working through that. We've done a lot of interviews with professors, with historians. We've gone to historical conferences. We've called out to our community. We have some interviews coming up in March that I would love to talk to some of you if you would like to be interviewed for the project. But we're really trying to pull the community into this documentary so that we can all bring the truth to light. So this is not something that just our community can be proud of. This is something that Longview can be proud of. Because I'm born and raised in Longview, and I love this city, and I know that we got a lot of work to do. And so that's the documentary's consensus for me, and I don't know.
We would like to have some time for questions. If you guys have any questions for us, whether it's the documentary side of the project, which we are still interviewing people, if this is something perhaps your family has talked about in the past or you have knowledge of, as well as it's not just about 1919, it's also about the after effects and the African American community here in Longview later as well. So if that's something you're interested in, you can see me or Jasmine afterwards. But does anybody have any questions for either?